Welcome to the UNSECURITY podcast. Each week, Evan and Brad give an inside look at current information security news, breaches, best practices, and other things you should know to improve your information security. Here are your hosts, FRSecure's Evan Francine and Brad Nye.
Hey, UNSECURITY podcast listeners. This is episode 52. The date is November 4th, 2019. And I'm your host, Evan Francine. My guy is with me, Brad Nye. Tell the folks something, Brad.
Words. Good morning, Evan.
You are following the show notes like verbatim.
Yes. Words,
etc.
Yes, etc.
All right. Well, we've got a great show planned today. I've been learning some things about doing podcasts, and one of the things that I learned is you're supposed to do a hook at the beginning of the podcast to tell people like, hey, keep listening because this podcast is going to get long. So unless you have a long car ride with nothing to do, I should give you a hook.
Okay.
All right. I'm going to do that. So what we're going to talk about today, we'll talk about, this is the 1 year anniversary. This is episode 52.
That's crazy.
I know. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the things that we learned over the course of the last year.
Some would argue we haven't learned a lot.
No. We totally have, man.
I'm kidding.
We're going to go down that path. And then we're going to welcome our guest, Mr. David Kruse. Dave, we can call him. He's an awesome dude who's got a cool career story. I think I like his career story because it parallels, I think, so many of our careers. But he also knows a ton about cyber insurance. So we're going to nail him with some tough questions on cyber.
Can't wait.
So, hi, David. Say hi.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm doing well. It's good to talk to you. Last time we talked, you were here in person. You were at the Hacks and Hops, I think.
Last time we talked, we were about 2 feet away from that glazed bacon table. So I can't say that was preferable, but that was a great day.
I just had a moment. Sorry. Did you say glazed bacon? Oh, yeah, I remember that. That was super good.
Yes.
I think I had like way too many portions.
Yeah. Glazed bacon on a stick. You just eat. Oh, so good.
Right. And I think there's certain times when it's okay to be selfish. And I think that was one of those times.
Mm-hmm. The only way you stop eating glazed bacon on a stick is when you run out of glazed bacon on a stick. That's
what happened too. I was very disappointed.
I know. I went back for more and it was gone.
Yeah.
Time to leave.
I was looking for somebody to blame. All right. And then after that, we'll wrap this whole thing up with some interesting news stories, including, I think the one that sort of troubles me a little bit is the Google.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Google buying Fitbit.
That'll be we'll talk about that.
All right. So let's dig in. David, we already introduced you. So again, welcome. Let's talk about our 1 year anniversary.
Yeah.
It's crazy, man.
It is.
Do you remember when the very first podcast we did?
Yeah. Zoom from our homes on a Sunday evening.
Yeah. I think the first maybe 5 were done that way?
It was more than that. It was like 10.
Really?
We didn't start doing it in person until January.
That was when I think either your wife or my wife or both wives were getting...
Both were like, okay, enough.
Yeah. They wanted their Sunday nights back. So.
My wife was getting a little frustrated trying to keep the kids quiet for an hour while we recorded.
Did you ever listen to any of those?
My wife did, and she played a couple back where you could totally hear the kids in the background.
Oh my gosh.
It was, slightly different.
Dave, did you ever listen to any of the first few podcasts?
I started listening. You had Ryan Clodier on for an episode. I think it was 17 or 18, maybe. So that was the first one I listened to because he's a buddy of mine from up in the cities there. And I went back probably half a dozen episodes prior to that and started listening. So I don't think I've got the early ones, but I've got a reason to go back and listen now.
No. Yeah. You can skip them if you want.
It was definitely, there were some awkward pauses because we didn't have a flow down.
Oh,
you couldn't see the other person really. So,
oh boy.
Yeah, it was weird because I'd wanted to do a podcast for a long time. And, I finally just said, screw it. Brad, you want to do a podcast? And Brad's like, sure. So we just started recording on Zoom. Mm-hmm. And I never listened to him. I've never listened to one of our podcasts.
The only ones I listen to are the ones I'm not on.
Yeah.
So
that's weird.
I'm with you.
So then we started recording here, right? We started recording in the boardroom with a Yeti mic.
Yep.
Somewhere in there was my trip to Cancun.
Yep.
Which was weird.
That was when, that might have been, no, that wasn't with.
It was January. So it would have been like 2.5 months in.
Yeah.
And then I guess the biggest miracle for me is that we did all these podcasts and we didn't miss a week.
I know.
Isn't that nuts?
It is.
We've been a day late, I think maybe twice, maybe 3 times.
Yeah. Most of the time it's some sort of a technical glitch and we had to, re-record or something.
Yeah. All right. So next week we're going to have Brandon. He's what would you call him?
He's our marketing guy.
Marketing guy.
He slaps marketing on things.
Yeah. Just kind of spits marketing.
Yeah.
Something like that. Yeah. So he'll be, we'll have to see what he says, but I'd love to see him put together some clips and maybe have him do the voiceover.
Yeah.
So people can, get introduced to Brandon. He can sit in here for a little while.
That'd be funny.
It would be funny. Do you have a favorite episode that when you look back over the 52 or 51?
I mean, there's been a lot, but I think that the best one that was kind of the riskiest for us was our wives.
All right.
Because that could have gone really, really not well for us. But I think it was good. And we got a lot of really good feedback on that one.
We did. We should invite them back. They make us look better.
Mm-hmm.
So we had the wives. I thought the couple of episodes with Ben were pretty cool. Because he's always got some interesting things. He just came back from ISACA where he gave his presentation in Chicago on his URL shortener research he's been doing. And I guess he got mobbed at the end.
That's good.
Yeah, it is really, really good. What else? We had Christophe Foulon on the episode a couple times. I really like him.
Yeah, I was bummed it didn't work out when I was in DC to meet up. It just didn't work out.
Well, and he did. So Christophe, has his own podcast, and it's really dedicated to helping people get into this information security industry.
Right.
He must be younger than us, too.
I'm finding that happens a lot more now. It's weird. I don't like it.
Yeah, man. We're getting. Do you see my beard? It's going long. Is there a lot of gray hairs in here? It's getting squirrely. I gotta go get.
Yeah, I need to get
cut down.
Mine's.
Yeah. All right, so Christophe, that was a good one, and then
Ryan Dave, a couple of times.
Yeah. Now, Dave, how do you know Ryan?
So I know Ryan through. Are you familiar with the group Sourcewell up in Minnesota?
Oh yeah. Yep.
Oh yeah. So I'm connected with sort of the main Sourcewell office up in Staples, Minnesota, through a gentleman named Ryan Donovan. Back in my former employer, Houseman Johnson Insurances, or an independent insurance brokerage based out of Madison, we partnered up with Sourcewell to offer a cyber insurance program for municipalities and school districts and nonprofits and other governmental organizations. That we sort of crafted to help make sure that they've got the best product that they could get. And so I was handling the insurance side, and then Ryan obviously works with Sourcewell Technology. So we initially met, up in Minnesota for the first time in person about a year ago. We had talked on the phone a couple times prior to that, but Ryan came into that meeting with a laundry list of things that he wanted to vet Sourcewell's insurance provider here, and hopefully I can say I've won him over the past year. But that's how I know him, is through Sourcewell up that way.
That's cool. The one thing I like about Ryan, I like a lot of things about Ryan, but the one thing that sticks out is just his passion. I mean, he genuinely loves people, and it's so cool. It's contagious.
Yeah.
He's just the perfect example of a mission-driven professional, and it's an attractive personality to be around. He's a powerhouse. When you get him going, don't get in his way. Right.
We should. I would like to work with him more.
He's helping on the S2 teen stuff, right?
Yeah, S2 teen, and I know he's also working with schools because he's very well connected to opens a lot of doors. But both of the episodes with Ryan, we had him on twice. One time I was in Anaheim, California, and so my audio was just
it turned
terrible.
into the Brad and Ryan show.
Yeah, and the same thing happened on his second time. I was in Bulgaria.
You were in Bulgaria,
Yeah, whatever.
That's fine. He's a great guest to have in studio because he's just so full of energy. Even
he doesn't knock like the boom
7
down.
a.m.
Like knock the audio boom down or anything. You know what I mean? Because
Right.
he's kind of animated too. He can get going.
Yeah.
All right. So those were good episodes. I'm excited.
Municipal ransomware episodes. Those were those were fire and brimstone episodes from the audience perspective. I love those.
Okay. And we should revisit
That's
those.
good to know.
Yeah, we should revisit those. I have I had somebody take a look, somebody that I think I trust and all that, take a look at our ransomware readiness assessment, the free one that we give away online, just to get his feedback. And I got some good feedback. And overall he really liked it. But I think there's some things we can do to make it even better.
We
like giving stuff away.
It was a version 1. There's always, right? It's never finished.
That is true. All right. So, real quick, Brad, what have you been up to? We haven't talked. What did you do last week?
Stuff.
Good.
No, mostly
Keep doing
it's
that.
more business stuff.
Businessy things?
Businessy stuff.
Numbers and such?
Yeah.
All
It's
right.
fun. It's different.
Colors were black? I mean, the colors of the numbers that you were looking at, they weren't red, right?
No, mostly black.
Good. Let's keep it that way, too.
Yeah, but if you find red, you got to figure out how to fix it, right?
It's true. Last week I was in, so I gave a talk, the Cybersecurity Summit, something about our talent shortage problem. I made those slides available online. And then, which was awesome, I ran into Peter Martinson there. He was my room guy. You know what I mean? When you give a talk, they'd flash those things saying, hey, you got 5 minutes left and stuff. And then the Minnesota Counties Computer Consortium, something like that, MNCCC. They, Aaron Call, the CISO for the state of Minnesota, was supposed to speak, and he backed out.
Oh, wow. John
was already scheduled to speak there. And so they reached out to me and said, hey, can you speak tomorrow? I'm like, okay, sure. About what? I'm like, I don't know. You get to pick. I'm like, what was Ryan going to, or Aaron Call going to speak about? I said, security and UX design. I'm like, crap. I don't want to talk about that. I can't tie that into anything I'm working on. So I made a slide deck. Excuse me. I made a slide deck, how to secure America.
There you go.
Did you see it?
I heard about it. Had a flag on every slide.
Yeah. Well, America, man. You know how I started it? I said, because it was all a bunch of counties. There was probably 120-ish maybe people there. I said, show of hands for everybody who likes America. And then anybody who didn't raise their hands, I said, you can leave. Right?
There you go.
They all stayed because who's going to leave when you say something like that?
What's the security guy talking about?
Right. So that was that talk. And then we were down in Dallas. And I met a bunch of really, really, really cool people in Dallas. But anyway.
I saw John's post on that the format, I guess, was really good, or he liked how they did that, or how it was structured. It's the weirdest
conferencey event thing I've ever seen. They had the vendors, and we were a vendor,
right?
But we weren't selling anything,
right?
Right. I mean, everybody else was selling things, and it was really interesting because a couple of people came up and told us, "You were the only people that actually asked about me." I was like, "Well, I don't know. Maybe you should go tell the people that didn't that they should,
right?
Because their sales would probably be more effective." But there were 10 vendors at this event, and we each sat at a table.
Okay.
And then all the business consumery people came in, and they were assigned to certain tables. And then you did these rounds. Round 1 was speed dating. So you'd have 6 minutes to tell them about your thing, what you're doing, and everything like that. And then after the 6 minutes, they'd ring a bell, and then they'd rotate.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And so, you go through all that, and then they vote on the business consumery people. They vote on who they want to see a demo from.
Huh.
And so John and I were like, that would really suck if nobody voted for somebody. You know what I mean? We had people, we had plenty of people, so there was I didn't really feel a fear nobody would come and want to demo our stuff, because then I'd just go get an energy drink or something, But yeah, it was just weird.
That's
but
interesting.
Cool, very cool. We met a lot of really neat people.
That's kind of a cool concept though, because that way it basically forces all the attendees to meet with all the vendors, and it doesn't allow somebody to like completely dominate the time for someone. And
it forces you to get to the point too. I like, give me 6 minutes rather than, and it's got this feature and that thing and this, Right. But there were two companies there that were selling AI, and I went to one and I'm like, tell me about your AI. Yeah, it wasn't AI.
Was it Omega Gen?
Oh yeah, dude. Yeah, you saw my.
I responded. Yeah, Omega Gen with AI and blinky lights.
That's right. So yeah, we're gonna have the gen to end all gens, right? You have next gen. We're gonna go all the way to the end and do Omega Gen, and we're gonna make a killing. We're gonna be so rich, Brad.
You'll have an easy button and blinky lights. What else do you need?
Well, AI and blockchain.
Yeah. Okay, there you go.
Put that in there too.
I forgot blockchain.
All right, enough of that. So, introducing Mr. David Kruse. So, Dave, I'm gonna see. I have it in all my show notes to call you David, but I'm gonna call you Dave because I feel like we're like closer than that.
I think so.
Yeah. So
whatever comes out of your mouth is fine with
me. Well, one of the most fascinating things. So when we were kind of prepping for the show a little bit, you were kind enough to kind of share your background, how you got here. And I think today you're starting a new job.
Yep. In 2 hours and 40 minutes.
So we're like this is cool. So 2 hours and 40 minutes, you start a job, and where are you going?
So I'm going to be going to a firm here in Madison called Gilware. They do a couple of things, but primarily they do digital forensics and then proactive risk control as well. And they also have a data recovery side of the business too.
Cool. And how big is Gilware?
So Gilware, there's probably about 45 employees operating underneath the name Gilware. Probably 20 to 30 of those are operating on the data recovery business. And then the remaining piece is operating under the forensics and risk control side.
Okay. And I assume you live out that way. Are you close to Madison?
Yep. I'm in Sun Prairie, about 5 miles east of Madison.
Okay. So that's a nice commute and everything. What's the competition? What's the competition like in Madison in terms of security people?
In terms of security, there's not really many firms who's secure that have security at the heart of what they do. I mean, you'll have plenty of firms that do sort of general managed services, and they also offer security in the form of a firewall and email filters. But there's not really many that are focused exclusively on security. I can think of one in Brookfield, which is just west of Milwaukee. And there's another one up in Stevens Point. Both of those are quality firms that do a good job as well. But in Madison, that I can think of off the top of my head, not really many.
Okay, interesting. Because FRSecure, the consulting company here, we do some work. I think we have partners in Madison, but I don't think we do much work there.
Okay.
And we like, and hopefully, hopefully you're the same way, but we like collaboration.
Yep.
More than competition, because I think there's so much untapped market everywhere.
Oh, geez. Yeah.
So
couldn't agree more. We're nowhere near saturation in terms of businesses that should be utilizing security services like ours. So at this point, all we should be doing is helping each other. Really.
Yep. I agree with that.
Couldn't agree more.
So in your path, which I thought was just really kind of fascinating, how you got to your, and it reminds me too of, there is no one path to get to a security career.
No. And I think the more varied the path, typically you're more well-rounded. You understand, the different businesses and how people work.
Definitely better looking. Right? I mean, proof in the pudding right here.
Yeah.
So, like Susan Malden, you remember Susan Malden, right? She was the CISO for Equifax, and she was getting all sorts of grief from some people. I think people who don't know better, that she had a degree in music.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but
if you looked at her experience, she was at SunTrust Bank for a good amount of time. I mean, she came up through the ranks, so she was pretty qualified, I think, to be the CISO at Equifax at the time. Regardless of how much grief she caught for being a music major.
Yeah, but I think I don't agree with that.
No. You shouldn't. I think it's wrong.
And you're seeing more people like that don't have degrees. I've said it. I don't have a degree. I've college experience, but I didn't graduate because I couldn't figure out what I wanted to do. Then I started getting into computers and just was like, oh, this is it.
Well, and
I've done certifications.
And by the time you got out of prison, you had to get a job.
Well, it was tough. You can't pick, but yeah, I think there's, and some of the more, I guess, progressive companies that are not as locked into the old ways are starting to see that.
Right.
And there was that post on, I've seen a couple posts on LinkedIn where it's, you can't, you want an entry level security person with a CISSP or, 5 years experience, or it's like, that's not
even possible.
You can't do that.
Right.
So,
yeah.
So you don't have a degree. I have a degree in geology.
Yeah.
Rocks.
You and Chad.
Yeah. Well, Chad's smarter than me. He remembers more. I think I did more drinking in college, so I kind of forgot most of the rock stuff. Dave, you studied what?
I studied theology and philosophy. So where most information security people start, I've found.
What is philosophy? I mean, is that just arguing with people?
I mean, if we want to get all high and mighty right out of the gate, the Greek comes from the Greek form of the love of wisdom. We can go with that, but it's just a lot of really dense reading. That's all it is.
I'm a big fan of wisdom.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Oh, that's cool.
Absolutely. So yeah, I did that, and then studied philosophy, and there was an ethics concentration built in there as well. So I'd like to think I can tap into that from time to time.
I thought the funny thing in your background, you said the most technical thing I've done or even put ever done is run disk defrag on parents' old Compaq.
That's pretty funny.
My uncle said it would make Duke Nukem run faster, and he wasn't wrong.
Duke Nukem, oh my gosh.
Wow.
Blast from the past. That's awesome. And then some VB in high school. So VB in high school. So now you're starting to date yourself a little bit. I was basic in high school. Apple II.
I'm trying to think I don't even know if they had a computer.
Really? Did you play Oregon Trail?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
We had that. Oh yeah. We had Oregon Trail, but no computer classes.
Was Oregon Trail, it must have been some kind of a government grant because everybody had Oregon Trail.
It was, because it was a game that was quote unquote educational, right?
Yeah.
That was fun.
You shot 5,000 pounds of buffalo. You can carry 200 back to the wagon.
Yeah.
We've all been there.
That's true.
He died of dysentery.
Ah, dang it. Again. So then your path, Dave, which I think is just cool. So you graduated college, unemployed painter, unemployed high school theology teacher, which is like, who does high school theology? I didn't even know that was a class in high school.
Mm-hmm. That was it was an all-girls school in downtown Milwaukee that I taught. So the interesting thing about that one is the state of Wisconsin probably, according to my fuzzy memory from earlier this decade, they stopped offering licensures or certificates for anybody that wanted to be a high school religion teacher, because they said, well, we can quantify what makes a good math teacher. We can quantify what makes a good English teacher, but how do you quantify what makes a good religion teacher? Because if you've got an Islamic, a Jewish, and a Catholic high school, how do you say, okay, how do you put a governmental rubber stamp on that and say, yep, you're approved? So the state of Wisconsin stopped offering licensures for that. So they said, you can still go ahead and do it, but we're not going to rubber stamp you. And what that really meant in practice is that I didn't need to get a degree in education in order to get that job. I just needed a degree in the subject matter. But what I found out maybe, 10 minutes into teaching was the subject matter is maybe at most 5% of what you do as a teacher. That's really secondary. The rest of it is all classroom management and behavioral issues and individual education plans and lesson planning and all this other stuff, all these hard skills that I had none of. So that was a short-lived tenure at St. Joan and Tita High School, but a valuable one at that.
Interesting.
Wow. That's cool. And then unemployed again, then nanny, bank teller, personal banker, insurance customer service rep, insurance broker, focusing on life science, tech business, and then leader of the agency's cyber practice. So here's where cyber starts to come in. Mm-hmm. And then you've been there for, how long were you there? 5, 6 years?
Yeah, I was at Houseman Johnson about 5.5 years.
Okay. And then now you're over at Gilware. Well,
yes,
soon,
indeed.
in a couple hours.
That's 2.5 hours.
So I tell people, because when I was young, I was an only child, so I was kind of a rebel, and I liked at that time, I liked to drink. So I've been sober now for 18 years, because jail just didn't. It's just enough of that.
It's not fun,
right? So, but when I was in college, I passed my Series 7 in '63, and became a stockbroker for what was the brokerage? It was called Hain, Miller and Farning. It was a little regional broker in downtown Minneapolis. And what that really meant was you're going to do all this studying and work really super hard to do nothing but cold calls for the brokers that have a book of business, the ones, mm-hmm. And so the job was 100 cold calls a day.
Oof.
Right. Every day working on straight commission. And I was like 19. Right. So if you've got money and you pick up, and I happen to get through some, call block and finally get to you, are you going to give a 19-year-old money?
Right.
To invest in penny stocks? The 2 penny stocks I had was CE Software, which is a Macintosh computer software manufacturer in Iowa, and a company called Apogee Robotics, which made robots for prisons. Right. I don't know if either one of those companies is still alive. The only client I ended up having that actually paid me was my mother. So I did that. But you know what it gave me? It gave me such a huge appreciation for people in sales. Mm. If you're a hunter, my God, is that hard work.
Yeah. I'm not a salesperson.
Right. And then what did I do after that? Oh, then I was a mortgage broker, a bill collector, a bartender. What else did I do? A warehouse worker, a warehouse manager, and then Then I got my first job at IBM cleaning boot sector viruses off of Windows 3.1 machines, all before like the age of 22.
Wow,
isn't that crazy?
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting. I had no idea.
Well, that's why when I read yours, I'm like, man, I can relate. I think I just did it all in like a 3-year span, and I think you probably took a little more time getting through it.
A little bit, but yeah, it's people find their way here in all sorts of ways. It sounds like.
Well, and it's so cool because everybody that I've seen, come from different perspectives, has such a good, refreshing perspective on things. Mm-hmm. It's so easy to get stuck in your ways. Now that I've been in information security, I've done this for 27 years. I still learn, I'm out talking with people. And if you just take the time to listen, they have a different perspective and it's valuable. So I don't know.
Yeah.
It's good stuff.
Well, I look at that path of mine, and I think that, one of the things that in my interactions with the information security industry, now being in that industry, I think one of the biggest assets that I've got is the fact that I have, like, seriously, disk defragmenter is as good as I get. So I think the fact that I don't necessarily have, I understand the risk and the problems the real problems it can cause for a business, even if I don't necessarily understand the technical reasons that problem makes itself manifest. And I think that when I'm having a conversation with somebody in the information security space, I'll mentally make a tally of the terms that they're using that your average normal person would never understand. And even if it's stuff that is really entry level thing for an information security person, we're still way past where normal people are at. Like even just a term like host, like nobody knows what that means outside of information security and IT. Nobody. That means nothing to anybody. So we got to start. You got to meet people at a much lower level, I think, or much more fundamental level than you sometimes necessarily think.
Well, no, a host is who's having the party.
Exactly.
Yeah.
My place.
Yeah. No. Okay.
And I got it, man. Security humor. Right? It's funny too, because when I give so many talks, I can't figure out why people don't laugh at my jokes sometimes when I remember the punchline.
Yeah.
But I think it's kind of what Dave's saying. I don't think they get what I just said.
Right.
And it's not because it's not a level of intelligence.
It's a different language. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a level of exposure, not intelligence.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, if I sat in a room and talked with a bunch of accountants and they were having a discussion, I'm guessing half of what they're saying, I have no idea what they're saying.
Yeah. I got a little taste of that. My sister's having some medical stuff and my wife's a nurse. So they were talking medical and I was just like, what?
Yeah.
I checked out. I was like, okay, I get it. This is what it's like.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, that's cool. So then when you were at the insurance agency, you founded their cyber practice.
Yeah, I was part of a team that founded it originally, and then as time went on, I essentially took over leadership of it. But really, the reason that we got that practice together in the first place was when you're within the insurance business, people generally assume that anytime a new risk is evolving, so to speak, and cyber risk had certainly been around prior to 2014, 2015 when I started there, but it wasn't necessarily the behemoth that it's become now, at least from the insurance industry's perspective. So people generally assume that if I have a loss, I have a general liability policy that's going to cover that loss. And insurance carriers don't necessarily think that way, because when they underwrite that policy, they're underwriting that through a pretty well-defined set of risks that policy is meant to cover. And all of a sudden, they're getting claims on their policies for things like ransomware attacks and losses of private information. And from their perspective, they never intended to underwrite that or cover that because it's outside of, they didn't even know what that risk was. So what carriers will do is they'll start putting exclusions on general liability policies saying this policy is not meant to cover X, Y, and Z. And what happens then is the industry will then sort of raise up a whole new category of insurance policies to offer affirmative coverage for it. And that's what we were seeing around 2014 and 2015. And we had seen this trend before. Back in the 80s and 90s, people always assumed that, okay, if there's a harassment issue at work or a wrongful termination issue at work, well, I have a general liability policy that covers that. And no, it doesn't. So a whole new category of insurance rose up called employment practices liability that covers those HR type issues. And that exact same thing was happening in the cyber and in the general liability and cyber insurance world in 2015. So we said this isn't something where we can just dip our toe in and just see what the water's like. We need to either jump in head first or not be a part of this at all. And not being part of it wasn't an option. So we founded our team at that point to really get a sense as to what all these new terms mean. What are carriers doing to respond to these risks, and which carriers are doing that in the best way? And that's really been our focus for quite some time.
That's cool. And you mentioned, in kind of the brief that you gave me, that you've read many insurance policies, cyber insurance policies. Mm-hmm. And then you developed this 100+ point test to identify weaknesses within them. Is that a proprietary test, or is that something that you can share?
Yeah, great question. So that's something that the basis of it is something that's available. That test was originally formed by a group called IRMI, the Insurance and Risk Management Institute. They put out a test that was maybe 20 points or so, and I used that as my basis to develop that into something that's a little bit more robust. So now it's about 100 points. That's something that since that was done under the guise of the former employer, that is their intellectual property at this point. And I wasn't allowed to take that with me when I left. So I can certainly share the basic ideas of it. Absolutely. And I would love to talk about what are the things you should be looking for on a policy like that.
Yeah.
But most of it's all up in my head now at this point anyway. So if anybody wants to talk and have me take a look, right now I know more about cyber insurance right now than I probably ever will again. So
well, I think it would be great, to have that opportunity to collaborate with you, Dave, just because we get that all the time, and you'll find it too when you already know this anyway. But there's a lot of confusion about cyber insurance policies and what's the right policy, what is
actually covered. Mm-hmm. What riders do I need?
Yeah. And often they'll ask, security people, and we're like, I'm not an insurance person. I don't know.
Yeah. But how many times are you asked to fill out the insurance application? That happens all the time for somebody in IT or somebody responsible for security for doing that. Yeah.
They probably wouldn't have us do it because we'll put the truth on there.
But we get questions from clients on how should I answer this, or we're filling this out, and it's like 15 questions or 20 questions for millions of dollars of coverage or whatever. It's like, I don't know how you could underwrite.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and that's what you're hitting on right there is probably the biggest disconnect between the technical side of information security and the financial side. So insurance in an organization is usually controlled by a controller or a CFO or like a VP of operations. It's usually one of those three titles that ends up handling this coverage. Maybe somebody in accounting sometimes. But the trend in terms of how you underwrite insurance, the application is always the basis for issuing a policy. And over the past couple of decades, really, the trend has been how do we identify what the most critical points of information are that we need to capture in order to underwrite this properly, and how do we make this application as short as possible so that people actually complete it and actually return it and actually buy a policy and get protected. So that sort of trend has been following on the cyber insurance side, and the people on the operations, the finance side love it. But the people on the technical side absolutely loathe these short applications because of what you just said, Brad. How can you possibly trust a carrier to cover you properly if you're only asking me less than 10 questions? How do you have any confidence in the person who's issuing you coverage? And I understand that, and I appreciate that. Really,
it was interesting. I can't remember who it was. It was an insurance person. But they were saying basically something along the lines of, we're writing out these multi-million-dollar policies on, a couple of pages. There's no way I would go and insure a building for that much without doing a physical walkthrough, without seeing what's going on. But we're basically just taking companies' words.
Yeah.
Like on this flip 2 pages of questions, right?
Yeah. Well, what's really incredible is there's one carrier that I know you can get a policy, usually probably a max of about $5 million in coverage. And you can get that policy with your name, your address, your annual revenue, and then a simple, have you had an incident in the past? If you give them those 4 pieces of information, they'll give you $5 million of coverage. And it's actually my favorite cyber insurance policy. That's the thing. It's right. Just right now the market's at a state where this is still a nascent market. There's not nearly enough businesses are carrying this kind of coverage. So right now, even if the carriers aren't doing really tremendously good underwriting, and it's not bad underwriting, but it's not as deep and as in depth as we might like, they can outpace whatever losses that they're facing by just writing mountains of new business. Eventually, that's going to catch up with the market. But right now, that's a bit of the tech that's going on. And to add a little bit to that, about 3 years ago, I took about 7 or 8 carriers' applications and lined them all up side by side because what I was curious of was what are the commonalities between these applications? What are the things that every carrier asks no matter what? And when I lined all of those apps up side by side, there were only about 4 items that every carrier asked about. Everybody asked about an incident response plan. Everybody asked about, do you have antivirus and anti-malware and a firewall, things like that. But what was interesting is the carrier that had the longest application, they had about 65 or 70 different loss risk control questions. They had, when we look across what the marketplace looks like, they probably have the smallest market share because their application is so onerous that they never actually write a dang policy because they never get an application back. So the ones that are doing the most in-depth underwriting, I don't necessarily believe that that's because they've got a better understanding of the risk either. I think they just open up a NIST framework or the CIS 20 and say, okay, well, each one of those is going to be a question. I'll throw it on the app and just hope they're gathering the right information.
Yeah. That's interesting. Well, and that was my sort of assumption too, though it's in line with what you're saying. It's, writing policies, get them on the street, collect, because you will outpace the losses. And I think, did we see a change? Because you would know better than I did, but did we see a change in like the jumbo policies? Because it seemed like those policies now, like a target policy or a policy for like General Mills or 3M, those are much more in depth because of the dollars that are at stake. Is that true?
Absolutely. Where you see a big sort of shift in how much underwriting gets done is once you get above about $1 billion in revenue. That's when you really are going to get more in-depth underwriting. And unfortunately, I didn't have the opportunity to work with many organizations with that kind of revenue. Most of the businesses that I worked with, that I had probably a handful that were approaching that, but the vast majority probably were in the 500,000 revenue up to about half of like 500 million. That's where the majority, of businesses are these days. Those are the majority that I worked with. But for some of those bigger ones, yeah, you're going to get a more in-depth underwriting process, because if you're going to have an incident at an organization like that, even if it's a minor incident for that business, it's still going to be a high dollar amount response. So, sure. Yeah. So they're going to want to understand what it is they're getting into. So some of the better underwriting practices are starting to trickle down to your everyday carriers and the policies that the businesses that we work with every day currently hold. But it's getting there. It's not there yet. But things like doing a basic external vulnerability scan, carriers are starting to do that kind of thing as part of the underwriting process. And that's not sufficient, but it's getting closer to that point.
Sure. Well, yeah. And I think because one of the things we do get also is, well, we've got cyber insurance, so we don't need to have, we don't need to have a risk assessment, or we don't need to, do
right.
all the other security things that you should be doing. Yeah. And that's
not true.
Yeah, I know, right? That's a dangerous mentality too.
Yeah, might as well get rid of the smoke detectors in your house and the sprinklers in your warehouse. You got fire insurance.
That's a really good analogy.
Yeah, it is.
I like that.
Yeah, and there's a couple of reasons for that. One is on the application that you've completed, you've probably made some warranty statements saying that you've got certain risk control practices in place. So you've signed, and that application is part of the policy, and payment is contingent on your true answers to that application. So at the very minimum, you need to be doing what you said you were doing when you applied for the coverage. But somebody mentioned this the other day, and it might have even been you at Hacks and Hops, Evan, if I'm remembering right. But the person who said this basically said, if you're dealing with a nasty ransomware incident, that's likely going to be one of the 5 worst days of your career. So yeah, you can have an insurance policy that might pay a ransom or cover your business interruption losses, but that doesn't shake the feeling that you have that you've lost control. That doesn't shake the feeling that your customers have or that your business partners have that maybe this isn't quite the sturdy foundation that we thought they were. Yeah. No policy can pay for that kind of stuff. So yeah, you want to avoid the loss, of course.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Because I assume there's no real cyber risk insurance for reputational risk.
That's right? Yeah, I don't know how you'd quantify that.
How you'd suffer in the marketplace potentially.
With great difficulty. So cyber insurance. So when we say cyber insurance, there's sort of 2 things we're talking about here. The first is the bolt-on riders and endorsements that you might have on a property or liability policy. Those aren't great. We won't go into all the details why, but usually it's low coverage limits and high cost per limit. So there's a lot of reasons not to do that. So if you have a cyber policy that's its own policy there, that'll typically include business interruption coverage, which is your loss of income while you're recovered from the incident. The other piece that some of the better policies offer is a reputational harm piece. That's once the incident has been remediated, what is your loss of income over the next 12 or 18 months? That you would have expected to incur, but are not incurring because you can trace that back to the incident that you had. You're right, Brad. That's difficult to quantify that. But some cyber insurance markets are offering a sublimit of maybe $50,000 for the services of a forensic accountant to help you quantify that loss. So there's the industry's starting to deal with that particular case, but that coverage isn't very widespread at this point, but that's something that's growing.
That's interesting. And so, I had another question. I was thinking, have you seen in your time, underwriting cyber or, writing policies or whatever, have you seen, claims be denied?
We've seen claims get denied. What really is happening when a claim gets denied, it's usually due to improper expectations of the client of what the policy would cover. And that doesn't fall on the client. That falls on the broker, whoever their broker is, to explain what the policy does and does not cover. It's really rare. I don't know that I've seen a claim get denied because you didn't have the right firewall in place or something like that. Really where claims are most often getting denied is not understanding what's actually covered, or not adding certain coverages that you should have at the very beginning. So I'll give you two examples there. Just 2 weeks ago, we had a client that called up and wanted to file a claim for about $15,000 was their loss. And what they were trying to do was they were sending some workers to do a job down in Virginia. So they were going to go on Craigslist and rent a house for them to stay at while they were down there for maybe a month or two. So it was a typical Craigslist scam where they sent the money off. And then when they said, okay, well, how do we get into the house? The person ghosted them and the money was gone and the house doesn't actually exist. So they tried to file that claim on their cyber insurance policy, but that type of Craigslist scam, really no cyber insurance market has ever intended to cover that, because how do you underwrite for that kind of a risk? I mean, the underwriter can't review all of Craigslist and identify the ratio of scams to not scams. So the insurance industry is really good at covering risks it understands and does not want to touch risks it doesn't understand. So that was a situation where a claim was denied because the client thought there'd be coverage for something the policy was never intended for. The other piece that we see far more often, not necessarily at my old brokerage, but at sort of industry wide, is people getting coverage for things like computer fraud or wire transfer fraud, but not adding in coverage for social engineering fraud. The insurance industry will define those a little bit differently. Social engineering is exactly what you know it to be. But the computer fraud is where somebody hacks into your network and then communicates directly through your online banking portal and sends a wire transfer to Latvia, and your money's gone and you're never going to see it again. Whereas the other one, you actually get tricked out of sending your money. So that's an issue where we've seen customers think coverage is going to be there, but either we offered the coverage and they declined it, or another agent offered the coverage and they declined it, or something like that. That's where we see most of the claims denials, but it's usually not for you didn't have your patch management procedure running properly. And a lot of the reason for that is most carriers on the underwriting side don't have the technical aptitude to even understand that you weren't patching properly. So they don't have a firm enough ground to deny the claim because they don't understand the technical side well enough.
Interesting. Yeah, I would definitely get the social engineering coverage.
Yes.
I mean, 95% of your breaches are coming that way. So if you decline that, naughty.
Yeah, we've had a couple of incidents where the company reached out to us and then went and filed the claim, and the insurance company had their own IR firm come in to review our work, or I guess question what was going on. And that's always an interesting discussion where, because we've had conversations with insurance and they're kind of like, well, let us know what they did wrong. Mm-hmm. So there's always the fear of working on behalf of the insurance to stop or not do that payment versus what's right for the customer.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, I think that sentiment is, especially people on the technical side, that sentiment is absolutely echoed. I would push back on that just a little bit and say that I've met with people that handle the claims on the insurance side of things, and often they're very good people. They're not necessarily in this to pay as little as possible. What motivates a lot of these people is how it's really the basis of what insurance is, and it's indemnification, making somebody whole again. So what drives a lot of the people on the claim side of an insurance company is how do we make this person whole again as quickly as possible, and according to the the values that this company has, something like that. Mm-hmm. So the carriers definitely will keep their own panel of incident response providers, but the reason they mainly do that is because they recognize that these are very time sensitive incidences, and the moment you have somebody in your system, you need somebody working on getting them out of your system yesterday. So they keep people on retainer just so that you can fire somebody up and say, all right, go take care of that. So it can lead to some sticky situations if a client has gone out, gotten their own IR team, and then the insurance company says, well, you should be using ours. And that gets a little murky. It certainly does.
Sure. That makes sense. Now, it seems like the one, we'll have to move on here in a little bit, but it seems like the one thing that insurance companies fear the most, and I just want to ask it because it just popped into my head, is one event that affects a wide number or a large number of, clients, because that's very, being that we are in such a connected world, and, you have things like WannaCry, which turned out to, I didn't cry, but there's the possibility that one catastrophic event that affects, half the United States, that's going to be very bad for the insurance industry, right?
Yeah, that would be tremendously bad. Yeah, okay. Absolutely. I don't know what else to say. Yeah, that would be terrible. So you're right. The cyber insurance conferences that I've been at and the white papers that I've read, they'll use the term aggregation to deal with that topic, but that is a big concern for a lot of folks. And it's not really hard to understand why, because if you have 500 policyholders all making $1 million claim all at once instead of one major claim every 6 months, that's the insurance company has a finite amount of money to pay claims with. So you might reach that finite amount at some point. So carriers do build in some backstops into the policy to prevent that type of thing from happening. And one example is, it actually, one of the news stories that you put in the notes here, Evan, about the Utah Power Company?
Yeah.
That was taken down by an attack. So better cyber insurance carriers will offer what's called contingent business interruption. So if a business you rely on is the victim of a cyber attack and you lose business income as a result of it, we'll pay that business income loss. So they typically mean something like an AWS or, some sort of cloud hosting company. Where I've not seen any carrier offer coverage is for utilities. If you have if your power utility falls victim to a cyber attack and you lose business income as a result of that cyber attack and you no longer get power, no, I don't know of any carrier that's willing to offer coverage for that, because you think about that, just like you said, you could have 1,000 policyholders get hit at the drop of a hat, and that would be awful. Right. So they usually don't stick their necks out for something like that.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah,
it'll be cool to see how this market sort of all kind of
matures.
Settles. The one thing, though, and for the benefit of our listeners, and because I agree with it completely, is you said business must work with a broker that knows what they're doing with cyber insurance, not somebody who's just dabbling in it or just kind of playing around. Mm-hmm. So when you're shopping for your own business cyber insurance policy, make sure you're going with somebody who's done this for a while, right?
Oh, absolutely. And the reason for that, property and liability policies, those have been around for 400 years. And the property insurance form, as we know it, hasn't really changed in probably 80 years. Every carrier puts their own little spin on it, but the form is basically the form. There's not really any sort of standardization in this market yet. It's trending that way, but it's not there. So having a carrier having a broker that really has some sort of a practice or some sort of person whose job it is to understand the current state of the market is going to be critical. One example of this I found is I was working with a hospital in Minnesota early this year. And they're a hospital, for Pete's sake. They're talking about a target-rich environment that is going to be high risk.
Right.
I went to talk with them, and they had a policy with a $1 million limit, which seemed shockingly low to me. If you look at the OCR's list of HIPAA fines, that's already that's already too low.
Yeah.
And then if you actually read the policy form and get into the conditions, they had what they called it a due diligence and a vendor due diligence condition, meaning that that basically said you need to be conducting yourself with the best possible information security policies, and you're also promising that all of your vendors are going to be doing that as well. How in the hell is a hospital supposed to do that? Tell me that's not a back door that the carrier could get out of paying whatever claim they wanted to.
Exactly.
that's not necessarily, I don't blame the carrier for writing that policy because they don't necessarily understand, they don't understand what they're offering coverage for. And that's a reasonable thing to offer, say on the property side. Yeah, you should make sure you've got working fire extinguishers and sprinkler systems or whatever. But to me, that was unacceptable. And the person that they were writing their coverage with was phenomenal on all the other lines of insurance. But I said, we really need to move this cyber, because this is a really bad condition you have built in. And the better insurance cyber markets out there aren't going to have those kind of conditions.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. Well, that's good, man. This is a really good discussion. Dave, we're going to have you on again, I'm sure, because hopefully, people that are listening have questions about cyber insurance.
I guarantee you people have questions.
Right? Well, you want to make the right call here, right? You want to, because how many times do we do incident responses, Brad, where we hear, well, I thought we were covered for that. Right. Not for insurance necessarily, but, they went out and bought a new blinky light thing and they didn't
spend a lot of money and
so yeah.
They don't have asset management in place. So yeah. Right. Hey, your blinky light only covers a third of your entire footprint.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
Oh boy.
All right. So let's move on to some news and then we'll close this thing out. So one of the news stories that caught my eye, and it was actually Brandon, I think, who sent it to me while I was.
It ruined our weekend.
Well, yeah. Is this Google buying Fitbit for $2.1 billion? How long before we start talking trillion? Someday. But this isn't a really interesting story. So I'm just going to choose the one from the New York Times because that's the one I referenced in the notes. But here, Google, the title is Google to buy Fitbit for $2.1 billion. The deal represents an aggressive attempt by Google to bolster its lineup of hardware products.
Yeah, I think.
Do you remember when Google was a search engine?
Do no evil.
I know, right?
This concerns me. They're claiming they're not going to use any health data for advertising, and I'll believe it when I believe that.
I mean, you've seen Google's response to other things. You've seen their responses to breaches. I mean, they're so aloof about this crap. They could give two craps about your data.
Right.
I mean, seriously, get serious.
And the problem is, what are your options now, right? What are other alternatives for that? But one of the things I saw that did make sense is, that wearable health analytics, market is really going to explode from a medical standpoint, not just, your personal health, but, from diabetics and all these other things. So that's where Google's trying to get in now because they want to diversify. So it's not just their ads.
They have such a vast amount of wealth though.
Oh, I know.
To get into this market.
I'm not defending them, but yes, I agree.
I mean, it's already, as a consumer, we're essentially powerless, right? I know Google has the GDPR compliant thing where you can go and see all the data that they have collected about you, but that's BS too. I don't believe it.
Well, and what's the penalty if they do have a breach and your personal health information is leaked and right? What is your recourse as a consumer against Google?
Yeah. So this just makes me feel very uneasy. David, what do you think?
It's nothing that I'm terribly comfortable with.
Yeah.
I think we talked about aggregation from the insurance side just a bit ago. I think that's a concern for the data holders that we work with nowadays too. I don't necessarily like the idea of one company having all that much. I don't know that there's much we can do about that as everyday people, but it's a concern.
Yeah. I don't know.
More.
I don't wear a Fitbit and I'm not going to, and I don't have Google Home, but even then Google, according to the article, controls or is involved in 90% of every internet search.
Yeah,
sure.
I mean, my God, the data they have is crazy. And even if they're not, there's nothing nefarious here. Google is such a wholesome company. That's just way too much power to wield in one place, right? I mean, oh, man, we're sinful for crying out loud.
Yeah, it's
all right.
It's interesting.
Yeah,
I don't want to talk forever about that because I'm just going to get depressed. And it's Monday. Let's not do that.
Got to start on a high note here.
Yeah. So the next one, to just make us even happier, this one comes from Threat Post. The next two news articles come from Threat Post. The first one is Global Crime Ring bilks U.S. military members, vets, out of millions. What do you think about this one, Brad?
I mean, unfortunately, it's something we see all the time. This was just very, very targeted towards military. But yeah, I think this is probably wider spread than people realize. But because it was vets, where it's a kind of a targeted group, it gets a little bit more publication. Mm-hmm. But yeah, unfortunately, this is pretty common for those types of online fraud.
Right. Well, and this is U.S. citizens involved too, right?
Yeah.
In this fraud. This Frederick Brown pled guilty and then he had a co-conspirator named, what's his name? Robert Wayne Bowling Jr. None of them have been sentenced yet, but what would be the appropriate penalty for somebody like this?
I don't know.
I saw another article this week on Iran. I don't know, Fox News. I was reading Fox News, and they were talking about the punishment in Iran. They're talking about how inhumane it is. Mm-hmm. I wonder what would happen to these people.
Yeah.
In a country like that.
I'm not sure you'd be hearing from them again.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, they would disappear.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy. Wow. So Bowling, Crawford, Kerr, and Siak, so these are others, are charged with multiple counts of conspiracy, wire fraud, and aggravated identity theft. Crawford remains in federal custody, and Bowling, Kerr, and Siak are in custody in Philippines awaiting extradition. They should, I wonder what the vets would like to do.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to guess they're not going to have a good time in jail because I think they said in there, like, each conspiracy is like 20 years in prison.
Right.
Up to, I guess, but with multiple counts. I'm going to guess they're probably not going to be real popular.
Face your accuser. That's what they should do. Just face your accuser. All the victims, the military guys, and gals probably. All right, another one from Threat Post. Solar wind power utility disrupted in rare cyber attack. So this is U.S. Energy Grid. This is S-Power, a Utah-based wind and solar provider. Series of lost connections in its main control center and remote power generation sites. Say it's a DOS attack, a DOS attack.
I mean, not well. I want to say that that's surprising that they were able to be disrupted by that, but I mean, it's sadly not.
Well, the fact of the matter is the entire power grid is so fragile. It doesn't really take much.
And it's running on stuff that's 20 years old because it works. Yeah. Right.
I was doing some work with a power company, a large one. And, we were talking about their control systems and we're talking about these Windows XP machines. I think they were, or maybe they might have been before that. It might have been 98 or something. I can't remember. XP. They were XP. And they were vulnerable, like completely vulnerable. And I'm like, we need to figure out a way to patch these. When they said, well, we can't. I'm like, why can't you? And they said, well, because if we patch that system and reboot it, everybody loses power.
Right.
Like, so you didn't build redundancy into this?
Nope.
And there's so many single points of failure in our power grid just due to common sense, poor planning.
Yep. Yeah. I know we've talked with power companies and stuff that still running like Windows 2000, some 2003, stuff like that for that exact reason. Well, we can't replace it because it'll take everything down.
Yeah. They have no redundancy.
No.
I was talking with the CISO of a hospital system in Michigan probably a year and a half ago, and we were talking about updating your systems and stuff like that. And the issue that she had is they were way far behind on either updating to a newer version of Windows or just patching the existing version for their MRI software. And and she was worried about that because obviously there's lots of sensitive health images and information that you can access in the hospital. And she said she approached her medical team and said, okay, well, we need to update this software. And the doctor said, no, we don't want to do that because the moment we update, the newer version of the software doesn't give us as good of an image as the old version does. So in a situation like that, in a hospital setting, when is patch management ever going to trump patient outcome? So you have to find a way to build around that. But in a case like that, maybe there's a legitimate reason not to do it, but that doesn't mean you necessarily just sit and stew with that risk. You still have to find a way to isolate that somehow.
Well, and you hit the nail on the head, right? You have to get creative. You have to figure out other ways to mitigate the risk because there's usually multiple ways to do it. And so one of the strategies in hospitals that, works well is microsegmentation, an isolation of those systems. So if there is a malware outbreak or something happens on that network, it's very limited. And that network is so hardened that if somebody's pivoting within the network, trying to find it, they'll be restricted in that too.
Yeah.
It's almost like treating them like little cardholder data environments in a PCI environment.
Yeah, the problem is that you don't see that investment being put in.
Well, they don't have any money.
Yeah.
I mean, most of the hospitals in the United States are losing money. I mean, even big ones here in Minneapolis, in the Minneapolis area, big health systems are only operating at like a 1 or 2% margin.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
It's tough.
They don't have the money to. It's just crazy. Anyway. Well, that's some good, some uplifting news for a Monday.
Yeah, good way to end it.
Right. Well, David, seriously, thank you for joining us. I do.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
I hope we get to do this again. There's so, as I'm sitting here thinking, I'm thinking of more insurance questions I'd love to ask.
Next time we'll do I was a cyber insurance broker for 5 years. Ask me anything.
There you go. That would be great. We should do a live show. We haven't done that before.
There you go. I drive up to the cities for that.
Yes. Year 2. I'm going to make year 2 the best year ever. Right.
Looking forward to it.
So episode 52 is a wrap. Thank you to our listeners as well. Keep the questions and feedback coming. We do read it. We do enjoy it. It's, I don't know, keep it clean if you can.
Yeah.
Yeah, mostly clean.
If not, make it funny.
Yeah. There you go. Yeah. Give me a picture that I can tweet that people will give me likes and laugh about it.
Yeah. There you go.
But send those things to us by email at unsecurity@protonmail.com. If you're the social type, socialize with us on Twitter. I'm at Evan Francine and Brad is at Brad Nye. David, do you have a Twitter account or any way you want people to follow you?
LinkedIn's probably the best way to go. If the LinkedIn link is something like LinkedIn/David R. Kruse, last name is Kruse. That's probably the best way to get a hold of me.
Perfect. That's how you find him. Also follow Security Studio. It's at Studio Security and FRSecure is at FRSecure.
You said that wrong.
What I mean?
You said at Studio Security.
That's how it is.
What?
That's how it is. Yeah. The other one was taken by somebody.
Oh,
yeah.
I thought it was. I did not even realize that. Well, I'm going to take that back then. Brandon, okay. Edit that out.
All right. That's it. Have a great week. Thank you.
Yeah, great talking to you guys.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the UNSECURITY podcast. We value our listeners and would love to hear from you. Give us your feedback by emailing us at unsecurity@protonmail.com. That's unsecurity@protonmail.com. Be sure to tune in next week to hear the latest insights from Brad and Evan.